Hello everyone. We are finally at a stage where we can start the CL55 215 project. Thank you for joining me here in Middle Earth, because it's currently 415 million degrees in here. I will go through our project, what we're going to do and what we're starting with. This is my CL55 AMG 215. In a fairly dismantled state, as you can imagine. Well, as you can see, sorry. There is a bit of a history behind this car. Long story short, I won't bore you with it. I sold it to a good friend of mine, Terry, at Wayne Gates Mercedes about 5 years ago. He drove it around, lent it to someone, it got involved in a small accident, and then it sat since then. I had a moment of lapse of judgment and bought it from him 2 years ago, where it has then sat outside my workshop ready to go. I did actually start driving it 2 years ago, but the fuel pump started leaking, and then I made a judgment call then to decide to just deal with all of the problems the car has at once. So this could be the only CL55 AMG in the world that doesn't have any faults. We all know that's not true, because there's always a fault or two with these cars, unfortunately, as they reach this sort of age. This one has a fair bit of underbody rust in the back end, which is why everything is off. We are going to be doing a multitude of things to this car, but primarily we will be dropping the subframe at the back, we'll be dropping the engine at the front and the entire drivetrain. We'll be removing all of the heat shields, all of the suspension components, all of the ABC suspension, and I will have an episode that just touches on the ABC system and how it works. All new brake lines, fuel lines, anything that will potentially give a problem in the next 5 to 10 years for corrosion or rubber perishing, things like that. This car is far from standard already. It has a secondary larger intercooler. It had water methanol injection when I sold it to Terry, but I believe it's been removed now. It has upgraded brake calipers on the front from a CL55 V12. Since then, it's also had a few little bits, primarily a gearbox TCU from a person called TJ Merry. He's very good with 7226 5-speed boxes, which is what's in this. And he can make them shift very quickly, very smoothly, and do stuff that no one really could imagine that they could do. We have a significant pile of parts for this car. The bumper has been repainted since the accident. We will not be doing any upper bodywork on this car, mainly because I run out of money and I like the bodywork to be done properly. So once everything is done, we will make sure that it's mechanically sorted, and then we will drive it and then get it done properly. That'll be a whole other part of the series, probably in a year or two. These are some of the parts that we've got. All new ABC parts. We'll be rebuilding the ABC system, apart from the valve bodies, which are currently fine, but they've got all new suspension struts to go on. The brakes, calipers and pads are all new already. So the calipers have actually been rebuilt. Pads, etc. are all brand new. Discs are brand new despite the rust. This is what happens when they get put on and then the car doesn't get driven. Interior wise, the car is in pretty good condition. Exterior wise, it looks a bit sort of mouldy and horrible because it's been sat for so long. Also, it's had a door control module since I bought the car, and before the door control module was fitted, the windows wouldn't go up, so it had been taped. Got a bit of water damage in the back as a result of that. I'm just going to go around the car and give you... It's actually in fairly good condition considering. Here you can see some of the water damage. Unfortunately, it ended up in the boot, but that's okay. What can you do? Otherwise, it's actually fairly solid, especially the sills, main sections of the car. Oh, there's a ramp there. You've got to remember this car is a bit of an unusual being. Got plastic front wings, aluminium doors, steel box section, steel rear end, well, steel rear floor, subframe, etc. Bottom end aluminium, boot lid plastic, roof magnesium. It is a bit odd, I know, but this is Mercedes' aim to try and make the car as light as possible, and still weighs 2 tons. I can't imagine what it would have weighed without all of that sort of weight saving design that they put into it. Bonnet is also aluminium. Didn't stop it corroding, however. What we're going to be doing on the engine side. Supercharger is going to be coming off. We're going to be changing the bearings at the back of the supercharger. The bearings at the front of the supercharger are new. We'll be replacing the ABC cooler radiator, the condenser and the radiator. Cooling system will be flushed through. We're going to replace the bearings in the, it's got a belt wrap kit and already got some lightweight pulleys. We're going to replace the bearings in them because they are rattling. We're going to do a few seals and things that are easy to get access to whilst the engine is out, and it would be silly not to. I'm just going to have a look. Yeah, Tom has already been there and drained the coolant for me, so he's excellent. We're going to be touching on the ABC system as a whole thing. The headlights are going to come out. They're going to be sanded and painted with a clear lacquer, so they look brand new because they're plastic, unfortunately, and they've gone grey. That's just a bit of what we're doing. I'm going to lift the car up. I'm going to show you the state of the underside of the car, and then throughout these series you'll be able to see progressively how we improve the situation. Looks a bit dire when you get underneath there. I've seen a lot worse. These cars hide a lot as well, and also you've got to remember this is a 2003 car. It's done just under 100,000 miles. It's lived in England, where we, over the past 5 or 6 years, just douse our roads with an incredible amount of salt for some reason. And as a result, it's rusting in places where you can't really see. So none of these would have been an MOT fail or potentially even mentioned it on the MOT. So we're pulling covers off and liners off where water would have been trapped, especially between seams. And so as a result, we've got to sort that out. So we're going to lift the car up and join me underneath. Right, so we've got the car up, halfway up so far, just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. So this is the inside of the rear wheel arch. We've removed the liner. Quite a lot of corrosion and stuff here, all surface. This area here, this is aluminium. That's just starting to bubble. We're not going to touch this. This will be part of the bodywork that's done later on. Anything that you can't see, we will be doing in-house. So the inside of the arches are fairly good, as you can see. Not really, nothing really there. I'll just nudge the camera up. Fairly clean. Where we get to the section down here, you can see where I've already started taking some of the rust away. I'll show you some of the tools that we will be using to treat this sort of rust later on in the video. But as you can see, this is all just starting. This is all fairly minor rust. There's a little bit of delamination going on. If I can just get the camera. You can sort of see just between the seams there. This is where the seam sealer has failed and water has gotten in. We'll be using 3 different methods to tackle most of this rust. So flap wheel on an angle grinder, needle descaler, which is good for these sort of areas, and then where absolutely necessary, sandblaster. Problem with the sandblaster is it gets absolutely everywhere. It fills the air with silica dust, which is really bad, gives you silicosis, and it's messy. So we will be sort of trying to resist using that wherever possible. If we can get a tool in there and touch it, we will. The ABC struts are fully functional, and we're not going to be replacing them. So we will be spraying the base of them, tidying them up, making them nice and tidy. The brake lines have already been done on this car, but for the sake of completeness, we'll be redoing them. The lines, however, are nice and new because they were fitted when we fitted the brake discs and the calipers. So they will be staying, but all of the suspension will be being replaced. We have a new subframe floating there from Germany. Looks as if it came off the factory line. Just goes to show the difference in how they keep their cars over there. The rear subframe will have new bushes fitted. As you can see, this bush does not look too happy. I fitted these subframe bushes 5 years ago now, and you can see they've already started to fail. Well, they have failed actually. This is just general weight from the car being held, the weight hanging down on the subframe. We've got new level sensor connections to go on, all new ABC lines, which really cost me a lot of money. However, nothing worse than having a line burst because you chose to leave that one out. So all new ABC lines to go on. We go around here. This is all in good condition. We've just sanded some of the aluminium corrosion down here. Focus. Come on. There we go. Bit of corrosion there. This is hidden by the bumper. This is aluminium. This is as a result of the water that came into the boot floor, which you could see in the earlier section of the video. I've started splitting the, come on focus, there we go. We've started sanding through here. As you can see, it's sort of eating a lot of this metal, so we're going to treat this as much as possible. This is steel, this is aluminium. You can see they've got a sacrificial, sort of a separating element between the two metals to try and prevent galvanic corrosion. It didn't work. Well, it may have worked, the car's 20 plus years old, so it's failed now. We've got this sort of section here which we'll be treating. All of this, etc. Otherwise, it's all pretty good under here. If I just whoop around the ramp, there we go. Tiny bit there at the jacking point, but otherwise this box section is really nice and solid still. We will be sandblasting all the brackets. Sorry, I should get that torch there. Sandblasting all the brackets to, what I'm going to do is turn the torch on the camera. There you go. Sandblasting all the brackets to make them all nice and shiny. They're galvanized steel. We will be sanding all of this wheel arch, cleaning it as much as possible. It's all pretty good again. Just a bit of reinforcement up there to be sorted. I've already redone the top mounts on the ABC struts, but we'll redo them for the sake of them whilst they're out, because it would be silly not to. We're also going to replace the receiver dryer as part of the air conditioning condenser replacement, because you do not want water in your air conditioning system, because water freezes and refrigerant gas doesn't. I'm going to go up again and we will take a look underneath. Right, here we are underneath. This is the fuel pump package, as Mercedes call it, along with the rear ABC valve block and the return accumulator, not the supply accumulator. We will be replacing most of these lines, apart from the fuel line that comes from the fuel tank. It's very rusty and it's pretty bad up here, if you can see. Get the camera up there. No longer available from Mercedes. Thank you, Mercedes. They are increasingly becoming bad with historic, well, I'll say historic vehicles, with the older vehicles that they used to be very good at supplying parts for. We're finding more and more and more vehicles that do not have parts available, so we're going to have to do something about this. We'll sandblast this gently or wire brush it and see what the condition is underneath. Hopefully it's passable. You can see why we're replacing the subframe. It's pretty rusty. It's taken the brunt of the salt in here. This is just a test bit where we sort of started sanding down with the flap wheel. But anyway, all of this is going to come down. The diff, unless I can find a good differential that's in reasonable cost, that one will be tidied up. It doesn't leak, it doesn't whine, it just looks a bit grotty, so we'll make it look nice and we'll take it from there. We've got a new prop centre bearing. As you can see, this one, it's got a bit of play in it. No point in sort of half-arsing the job. This will be sandblasted. Sorry, this will be sandblasted and painted. Sandblasted and painted. New engine mounts and new gearbox mount. We will be dealing with this oil leak from the gearbox, which is the sump plug. Gearbox has been rebuilt, new valve body, etc. So we won't have anything to do with that. We're going to just sanity check everything up here, make sure everything is good. All the lower arms are new on this car. The front arms are not new and the bushes are fairly worn, so we're going to be replacing those too as well. Any of the lines that look like this are going to be replaced. I do not want this car to be back off the road in 6 months' time because it's got a leaking oil cooler line. As you can see, this is why we're replacing the front ABC lines. You cannot bleed the system properly without opening these. Look at the state of that one. Right, they're all the same. They're going to leak eventually. If you touch them to try and bleed them, they're going to leak. If you can't get them open, you can't bleed them, the system will have air in it. I'm telling you. I tell you! If you don't bleed the system, it won't drive properly and the thing will hiss and moan and it just won't be that great. So you do need to bleed the system properly. Most of the damage under here is superficial. This is where somebody has jacked the car up in the past and missed the jacking point and crushed the seam. We'll treat that. I'll go through what we're going to do with the rust. So we're going to sand it down to bare metal wherever possible. If I go to a section here where we've already sanded it down to bare metal, this is pretty good. The black sections inside that piece of metal are actually embedded pieces of rust. You'll never get them out unless you keep cutting the metal until there's no metal there and put new metal in by welding it. That's beyond the scope of this job. I have to be realistic. The car is currently worth 10 £10,000-15,000 in exceptional condition. We're going to be spending probably 4.5 on parts alone. I will itemise everything as part of the series, but you've got to draw the line at some point, and it's going to have a repaint in 2 or 3 years' time, and that's going to cost another £3,000 or £4,000. So what we're going to do with the rust, we'll get it down to bare metal. We are going to use multitude of products available to us, but primarily we are going to, once we've got the metal down to basically pitted rust, which is what the black sort of rust that I've just shown you, we're going to treat it with a product called Dynax, Built Hamber Deox Gel. So Deox Gel is a gel, funnily enough. It goes on the surface of the metal, you cover it in cling film and you leave it for 24 hours. It's quite a long process on how you use it, but all it does is it converts that rust chemically to something else. I don't know what it converts it to, but it's inert and it traps the rust in the metal. Once we've got the rust completely converted and nice and treated where it's not going to come back, we are going to cover the rust with an anti-corrosive epoxy primer, specifically Raptor. You can tell there's an American company because they've got a product called Raptor, when it's just an underbody anti-corrosive primer. This is a 2K epoxy primer. So 2K means it has an activator and a hardener, or an activator or a hardener. Once you've mixed it, it will become activated. You spray it within 30 minutes. You follow the procedure very carefully, and this will chemically bond with the metal and the treated metal that we've previously treated with the Deox gel, to completely trap the rust and seal off that metal. So any rust that's still present in the metal will not proceed further because it doesn't have any oxygen. And it will also, once we've keyed up the factory undercoating surface, it will ensure that that never rusts as well. Once this is treated and dry, we will then cover it with Raptor underbody coating. This is a bed liner / underbody coating. It dries to a sort of matte, rubbery, black, it's polyurethane basically, coating. This will resist stone chips and bits of stuff flying up underneath the car. That, combined with that, will mean that the car will not rust where we've treated it, which is why we've gone to such extents to essentially dismantle it as much as possible. Once the whole thing is painted and dried and treated, we will then cover the car with Built Hamber Dynax UB. So this is basically a advanced type of under wax coating. It will go on the top of everything. It will go into crevices and cavities by itself because it's a wicking wax, and then it will dry to a tacky hard finish. It's self-healing to a certain extent, so if a stone chip or some debris hits it, it will refilm over again. And we are going to spray it basically everywhere we can get. So we're going to spray it all inside the box section here. Any plugs that we can remove, like here, we're going to fill it. We're just going to put it everywhere, basically. We've got to be careful that some of these plugs actually go into the car. We don't want to fill the car with Dynax, because whilst it's an effective underbody coating, it smells horrendous. So you don't really want it floating around in the car. Once that's done, the underside of this car will not need to be touched for 15 years until something breaks. This is why we're doing the subframe bushes, which is why we're doing all the lower arms, this is why we're doing everything. So that's what we're going to do. So follow us on this journey for where we can find lots of hidden rust like this. It looks pretty bad. These sections are underneath the rear exhaust boxes. This is a test area we've done with a bit of sandblasting. You can see the different finish here. Whoop. One of the gimbals decided to have a hissy fit. Gimbal, where are you? There you go. So you can see it gives you a pitted surface, which is great for keying for paint, because paint will love to stick to all of that surface. You can see why we've tested the sandblasting here, because this is a very hard area to get any sort of angle grinder or flap wheel in. This is the boot floor. This is plastic and is bonded to this section of steel. We're not going to be able to treat this rust effectively all over the place. We're going to do our best. This is going to be coated in Dynax. I'm not too worried about it. We're going to get as much of it looking like this as possible. These are where the exhaust mounts, the rear back box like hangers mount to. We're going to treat that as much as possible. It's the same sort of story here. Again, it's where all the rust starts because the salt spray from the road gets kicked up under here, underneath the rear subframe. Once we've got a subframe off, you'll have a much better picture of what sort of carnage we're looking at. We're going to replace the fuel pump because it's leaking, which is why it came off the road in the first place. We are going to replace the fuel filter. This is part of the... I'll touch quickly on this. Mercedes, instead of just running the fuel pump at 100% all the time, Mercedes think, we're going to put a fuel pressure sensor in line with the outlet of the pump, and we're going to run it off a control module, and this varies the outlet of the pump to maintain a specific fuel pressure, from memory about 55 psi. The idea being that the pump lasts longer and the filter lasts longer because you're not flowing loads of fuel through it and then back to the tank. The downside to this, well, it's not really a downside, but something to consider is that the pump has actually failed because it's leaking, not because it's worn out. This is an original pump. It's a Pierberg. We've got another Pierberg to go on it. It was a lot of money, but it's much better to do it. If you cheap out a fuel pump, the engine goes lean and goes bang, then you're going to regret saving that £100 on the cheapo fuel pump. I've tested many different fuel pumps on many different vehicles. Always go with something proper. Either OEM replacement that matches the flow rate and the pressure characteristics, or a good aftermarket alternative like a Walbro. Walbros have their limitations. They're nice and cheap, but they are loud and they draw a lot of current. So some of the wiring has to be upgraded if you're going for more fuel. And that's it really. So we are going to, I'm just going to swap you over so you see my lovely face. Oh, a bit dark. There we go. We are going to do all of this in the next episode. We're going to have the subframe off. We're going to have a lot of this rust sanded down, and we're going to touch base on that. We have a lot of toys to go on as well in those boxes, which are just behind me. Oh, there. We're going to put the water methanol system back on. We are going to reinstall the crank pulley. We're going to pin the crank pulley. So this car, I'll go over some of the power mods. It's got a larger crankshaft pulley rather than a smaller supercharger pulley. Larger crankshaft pulley, at the time I did those modifications, was much more readily available than a very small supercharger pulley. As a result, the larger crank pulley is harder on the crankshaft, and sometimes it damages the factory keyway and it can come loose and damage the crankshaft. Damage the crankshaft, engine has to come out, be rebuilt essentially. We're trying to avoid that. What we're going to do by what's known as pinning the crankshaft is we're going to take the crank pulley off, we're going to drill another keyway or two in the crankshaft, and then we're going to put two new pins, drill the same holes in the pulley, and we're going to put two new pins, and they are going to locate in the crankshaft, just so that it basically has 2 or 3 in total keyways. That will hold the crankshaft on the car. It's never going to come off after that. Once that's the benefit to having the larger crank pulley is that if you put a smaller supercharger pulley on it, it's more likely to slip on the supercharger. A larger crank pulley also underdrives, spins the supercharger faster. However, you don't have the same problem because you've got more surface area to grip that belt. Once all done, everything back together, this car should be running about 600 something odd horsepower at the crank. We're probably going to be somewhere around 500 wheel horsepower. We're going to put it on a dyno at our friends at Road Rage Performance, which will be great, and we're going to do some data logging, etc. But yeah, so follow me on the journey. We've also got some bits on the interior to do. Sunroof seal is leaking on the A-pillar, so we have some sort of window garden going on the inside of the car, which is not where you want your window gardens, trust me. Once that is sealed up, the interior is actually basically finished. Mechanically, the car drives, runs, and is like you could get in it now and drive it, assuming the fuel pump didn't leak and catch fire. The only other things that we've got are the keyless go has decided that somebody is pressing one of the lock keys all of the time, and we need to track that one down. And when you get in the car, it says SRS Visit Workshop for a split second and then disappears. So it may need an SRS module. We'll take a look at that in due course. But follow me from what is a horrible CL at the moment to a transformed vehicle. Once it's all done, it's going to go to our friends at KVS. They're going to do a full valet. It's going to look amazing, even without the paint. I can't wait. I'm really excited. This car means a lot to me. You know, 10 years ago, this was my first big power AMG, and I want to keep it going as long as possible. I'm never selling it, clearly, because I've got my life savings invested in ABC lines. Yes, it's going to be really exciting. That's basically it. So follow us for the future.